Well, I do agree with our panelists that the independence model isn't helpful. It simply creates the impression that theology is isolated, exists in a ghetto, and that the world could continue to exist without talking to theologians at all. And that may be good news for some theologians, but for me, it just means that we have nothing to say, and we have something to say. And so I think that what we need to do is reflect on how we can be confident in the ability of the Christian faith to create conceptual space for other disciplines, such as natural sciences, without being arrogant. Confident, but not arrogant. That seems to me to be very important indeed, to say we have something distinctive to say. We can point to our history and make the point that the scientific revolution took place in a Christian context, and there are very good reasons why that happened. I think that we really do need to engage more with this sort of thing. I think one of the questions that has emerged towards the end of this discussion is, what can we do about this situation? I think that is a very interesting question, and there was a paper published last year, very recently, by the sociologist Elaine Eklund of Rice University. And she and a team of researchers asked, what sort of factors impacted on the public perception of the relationship of science and faith? And what they found created the most positive response was this: a scientist who embraced faith and was able to personally integrate them. In other words, somebody who could simply talk from a position of authority as a figure of wisdom as a scientist, who said, my faith matters to me, and here is how I hold my faith and science together. And I think there are 2 points that Eklund is making. Number one, we live in a postmodern culture where very often what matters so much is not arguments, but personal stories. And a leading scientist telling a personal story, which is about the relevance of faith to science and his or her own integration of faith and science, actually might be very powerful. And the second point is this, that people in our culture are looking for figures of wisdom. What I mean by that is somebody they can look up to, someone who's an example. And they might well look up to theologians, but actually scientists do have greater cultural authority, I'm afraid. And so a scientist who takes religion very seriously and is able to weave them together might actually be very significant. And I'm sure you have these figures here in Finland. We certainly have them in England. And I think you might like to think about how best you could use those in effect, serving as role models for younger people. People who are saying, well, maybe I could hold them together, but I need someone to help me do this. Identifying a figure who could perhaps give a video testimonial or a video presentation of how they did this might really be very effective. And the final thing I want to say really is this, that the philosopher Alister McGrathin, I think, developed this idea of tradition-mediated rationality. What he meant by that is that the Enlightenment dream of a universal reason is dead. What we have instead are understandings of what it means to be rational, which actually are linked to certain communities, one of which, of course, is the Christian church. And McIntyre makes this point, that one of the ways in which you can judge how reliable these rationalities are is how much sense they're able to make of the existence of alternatives. In other words, in the case of Christianity, why are there other faiths? Why is there science? And I do want to emphasize that any decent Christian theology can give a very good response to both those questions. I think we need to emphasize the intellectual capaciousness of the Christian faith, because I think it does 2 things very effectively. Number one, it shows we have nothing to fear from reasoned interrogation. In other words, we are able to say things with confidence and integrity, and that I think needs to be said. But secondly, in our culture, very often there is this automatic reflexive portrayal of faith as something that runs away from reason. And I think we need to try and reverse that cultural stereotype. I think one of the best ways of doing it is simply by talking about this a bit more and giving people permission to begin to open up the rationality of faith, perhaps choosing some very good examples, people who've done this. I've mentioned C.S. Lewis, I'm sure you have a Finnish equivalent. But the key thing is there is a cultural perception which is very influential for younger people. I think the question we have to engage is, it's very good to resource pastors, it's very good to resource congregations, but how do we change public perceptions? Seems to me that's a big question to look at as well.